Ambassador Helena Blackwood stood at the observation deck of Europa Station, watching Jupiter's swirling storms in the distance. The massive gas giant's presence seemed fitting for the weight of today's negotiations. 20 years of wet-work operations hadn't prepared her for the delicate dance of diplomacy, but retirement had a way of pushing people in unexpected directions. The station's crystalline architecture caught the distant sunlight, casting prismatic patterns across her formal diplomatic attire. The Meridian Collective would arrive within the hour, and with them would come either peace or the spark that could ignite an interstellar war. Their recent expansion into human-claimed systems had pushed tensions to the breaking point. Ambassador, the Meridian delegation has requested an early arrival, her AI assistant, Aria, announced through her neural implant. Their flagship has already begun docking procedures. Helena allowed herself a small smile. The Meridians were testing boundaries already, trying to throw her off balance with the unexpected schedule change. Inform station control I'll meet them at docking bay 7. And Aria? Run a passive scan of their approaching vessels. Standard security protocol. As she made her way through the station's curved corridors, Helena noted every security camera, every maintenance access panel, every potential choke point. Old habits died hard. The station's security chief, Commander Rashid, fell into step beside her. Quite the show of force they're bringing, he said quietly. 3 diplomatic vessels, all suspiciously well armed for peace talks. The Meridians believe in speaking softly and carrying a big stick, Helena replied. Unfortunately, they never quite understood the first part of that phrase. The docking bay's massive doors slid open, revealing the Meridian delegation. Their crystalline exoskeletons caught the light, creating dancing patterns across the walls. Leading them was High Speaker Viraxian, his core pulsing with bands of blue and gold, colors that Helena knew signified both authority and aggression in their species. Ambassador Blackwood, Viraxian's translator hummed. How gracious of you to accommodate our early arrival. We trust this demonstrates our eagerness to resolve these territorial disputes. Helena bowed slightly, exactly 15 degrees, enough to show respect, not enough to show submission. The United Earth Coalition welcomes the Meridian Collective to Europa Station. We share your eagerness for resolution. The first warning sign came during the ceremonial greeting. One of Viraxian's honor guard shifted their stance slightly, a movement that would have seemed natural to most observers. But Helena had spent too many years studying xenocombat forms to miss the subtle activation of defense matrices. They were expecting trouble. Or planning it. The diplomatic reception that followed was a masterclass in unspoken tensions. Representatives from 12 species mingled in the grand atrium, their translators creating a subtle symphony of overlapping languages. Helena navigated the crowd with practiced ease, noting which species clustered together, which remained isolated, which watched the Meridian delegation with barely concealed concern. The collective's position is quite simple, Viraxian announced during his opening statement. The Proxima Centauri system lies within our sphere of influence. Human expansion threatens the delicate balance we've maintained for millennia. Helena took a slow sip of synthesized wine, giving herself time to choose her words carefully. High Speaker, the Proxima system is 17 light-years from your nearest colony. Your own treaties specify that uninhabited systems beyond 5 light-years are open for settlement. Treaties can be reinterpreted, another Meridian delegate chimed in, their crystalline form flickering with patterns that Helena's neural translator tagged as aggressive superiority. The room's temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Helena noticed 3 different species quietly moving toward the exits. They'd seen conflicts like this before, knew how quickly diplomatic posturing could turn to violence. Reinterpretation works both ways, Helena replied, her diplomatic smile never wavering. For instance, one might reinterpret the presence of armed diplomatic vessels as an act of intimidation rather than a gesture of peace. Viraxian's core pulsed with bands of deep crimson, surprise, quickly masked. They hadn't expected her to call out their show of force so directly. The human reputation for diplomatic naivety had worked in their favor once again. As the reception wound down, Helena received a priority message from Arya. The AI had detected unusual energy signatures from the Meridian vessels, weapon systems cycling under the guise of routine maintenance. More concerning were the encrypted transmissions being sent to unknown recipients within the station. Helena excused herself from a conversation with the Arcturian ambassador, making her way to a quiet alcove. Arya, map those transmission endpoints and flag any unusual movement patterns in those sectors. And send a discreet message to Commander Rashid, Level 2 Security Protocols, Authorization Blackwood 7 Delta. The next few hours would determine whether this became a footnote in diplomatic history or the opening chapter of another interstellar conflict. Either way, Helena suspected her retirement was about to become a lot less peaceful. Looking out at Jupiter's eternal storms, she allowed herself a moment of nostalgia for simpler times, when problems could be solved with a well-placed shot or a carefully orchestrated accident. But she had chosen this path, traded her stealth suits for formal wear, her weapons for words. At least, most of her weapons. The weight of the modified fountain pen in her jacket pocket was reassuring. Some habits were worth keeping, especially when dealing with those who mistook diplomacy for weakness. The botanical gardens of Europa Station were a testament to humanity's stubborn insistence on bringing beauty to the harshest environments. Thousand-year-old bonsai trees shared space with luminescent Centaurian crystal flowers, creating an illusion of natural serenity that almost masked the growing tensions aboard the station. Helena walked its winding paths during the scheduled recess, her diplomatic smile firmly in place even as her enhanced senses catalogued every detail. 3 maintenance workers who moved too precisely to be actual maintenance workers. A security camera that rotated 5 degrees too far in its sweep. The subtle shimmer of active camouflage technology poorly masked by the garden's atmospheric controls. Arya, she sub-vocalized, how many of our friends are joining us for this evening stroll? I detect 7 entities employing various levels of stealth technology, the AI responded through her neural link. Their energy signatures match Meridian combat systems, though they're using outdated IFF codes. Helena's smile widened slightly. Deniable assets, the Meridians were learning. Unfortunately for them, they were still amateurs playing a professional's game. Ambassador Blackwood, a voice called out, its artificial pleasantness barely masking underlying tensions. Second speaker Lysithea emerged from behind a cluster of Jovian frost orchids, her crystalline form pulsing with diplomatic colors. What a pleasant surprise to find you here. Second speaker, Helena acknowledged with a perfect diplomatic nod. The gardens are lovely this cycle. I find they help clear the mind before difficult negotiations. She gestured to a nearby bench. Would you care to join me? The Earth delegation has prepared several alternative proposals regarding the Proxima situation. The subtle shift in Lysithea's color patterns told Helena everything she needed to know. The second speaker was here to delay, to keep her in position while their operators moved into place. Amateur hour indeed. I fear the collective's position remains unchanged, Lysithea began, launching into what promised to be a lengthy monologue about historical precedents and spheres of influence. Helena listened with half an attention, the rest of her mind calculating angles and distances. The hidden operators had formed a classic containment pattern, one she'd both used and countered during her active years. They'd even remembered to cover the upper maintenance walkways, a professional touch that might have worked against a real diplomat. The first attack came exactly when she expected it would, during a natural pause in Lysithea's speech, time to mask the distinctive whine of charging plasma weapons. Helena was moving before the first shot was fired, her enhanced reflexes carrying her clear of the initial barrage. The bench she'd been sitting on dissolved into superheated slag, while Lysithea's surprised exclamation was cut short by a hastily activated personal shield. Arya, execute Protocol Midnight, Helena commanded, rolling behind a decorative boulder that was far more dense than its appearance suggested. And please log a formal protest regarding the unauthorized use of military-grade weapons in a diplomatic sector. Protocol executed, ARIA confirmed. Security feeds are now operating on a 30-second delay. Would you like me to cite specific treaty violations in the protest? A plasma bolt sizzled past Helena's ear, turning a priceless Martian desert rose into vapor. Let's start with Article 7 of the Diplomatic Conventions. And while you're at it, remind me to thank Commander Rashid for installing actual stone fixtures instead of decorative holocasts. The Garden's atmospheric controls were already responding to the weapon's fire, emergency containment fields shimming into place. They would trap everyone inside, exactly as the attackers had planned, and exactly as Helena had anticipated. Your reputation appears to have been greatly exaggerated, Ambassador, one of the attackers called out, their active camouflage flickering as they moved closer. The legendary Helena Blackwood, reduced to hiding behind rocks. Helena removed her formal jacket, carefully folding it to protect the antique fountain pen in its pocket. You know, she said conversationally, in my previous career, the people who talked the most usually survive the least. What followed would later be described in classified reports as a regrettable series of security system malfunctions. The Garden's atmospheric controls suddenly reversed, creating localized pressure differentials that played havoc with active camouflage systems. Maintenance panels unexpectedly opened, emergency lights strobed in patterns that perfectly countered Meridian combat visors, and the decorative water features demonstrated remarkably precise targeting capabilities. The first attacker went down to a perfectly thrown fountain pen that somehow bypassed their shield harmonics. The second discovered why Earth's diplomatic corps insisted on using actual stone in their decorative fixtures, especially when said fixtures were accelerated by precisely calibrated pressure differentials. The third and fourth attackers maintained their discipline, switching to conventional weapons when their energy weapons mysteriously lost power. It was a professional response that might have worked, if they hadn't been facing someone who'd written half the counter-assassination protocols they were trying to use. I must admit, Helena said, disarming the fifth attacker with a move that shouldn't have been possible for human joints to accomplish, I'm rather disappointed. The Terminus incident had better planning, and that was organized by actual amateurs. The sixth attacker, showing more wisdom than their colleagues, attempted to surrender. Unfortunately, they chose to do so while standing on a section of floor that had become unexpectedly frictionless, leading to what ARIA would later classify as self-induced incapacitation. The seventh, presumably the team leader, managed to get off a single shot before finding themselves in a submission hold that technically violated several laws of physics. Wait, they gasped, you're supposed to be retired. I am retired, Helena agreed, applying precisely calculated pressure. This is me being diplomatic. Would you like to see what I consider aggressive negotiations? In the end, it took station security exactly 7 minutes to respond to the Garden disturbance. They found 7 incapacitated attackers, 1 slightly singed but otherwise intact Earth ambassador, and a very flustered second speaker who was having considerable difficulty explaining why elite Meridian combat operators had been disguised as maintenance workers. Helena retrieved her jacket and fountain pen, taking a moment to straighten her cuffs. Arya, please inform High Speaker Viraxian that the Earth delegation would be happy to resume negotiations at his convenience. And do add a footnote about Article 12 of the Security Protocols, the one about unauthorized combat units in diplomatic zones. Of course, Ambassador, Arya replied. Should I include the footage of your diplomatic response? Only the first 30 seconds, Helena decided, stepping carefully around a groaning attacker. We wouldn't want to seem threatening. After all, we're here to negotiate peace. As she left the gardens, Helena allowed herself a small, genuine smile. Perhaps retirement wasn't so boring after all. The emergency session of the Interstellar Council buzzed with barely contained chaos. Representatives from 17 species crowded the chamber, their translators creating a cacophony of overlapping languages and accusations. At the center of the storm, Helena Blackwood sat perfectly composed, reviewing security footage on her datapad while diplomatic protests flew like missiles around her. This is an outrage. High Speaker Viraxian's crystalline form pulsed with patterns of righteous indignation. The Earth ambassador clearly orchestrated this incident to discredit the collective. Interesting theory, Helena replied without looking up from her datapad. Though I admit I'm curious how I managed to orchestrate your combat operators wearing outdated Meridian military IFF codes. That seems like rather detailed planning on my part. The Arcturian representative's crystalline form shifted to a pattern that the translator rendered as diplomatic amusement. Several other species representatives quickly muted their translators, though their body language suggested suppressed laughter. The collective demands an independent investigation, Viraxian continued, his core pulsing with increasingly aggressive patterns. And the immediate suspension of all colonial negotiations until... Actually, Helena interrupted, finally looking up, I believe the Rigelian conventions are quite clear about attempted assassination of diplomatic personnel. Article 17 specifically calls for an immediate review of all treaties with the offending party. Shall we begin with those colonial rights you're so concerned about? The chamber fell silent. Even the translation drones seemed to hover more quietly. That won't be necessary, a new voice cut through the silence. First Speaker Nyx of the Meridian Collective glided into the chamber, their crystalline form displaying patterns so complex that several translators simply gave up. High Speaker Viraxian appears to have exceeded their authority in several matters. They are, effective immediately, relieved of diplomatic duties. Helena watched with carefully hidden interest as the chamber's political currents shifted. The Meridian Collective was famous for many things, but public admission of error wasn't one of them. Something else was at play. The collective, of course, extends its deepest apologies for this unfortunate incident, Nyx continued, their patterns shifting to formal contrition. We request a brief recess to reorganize our delegation and prepare appropriate reparations. Motion for recess, the Arcturian moderator quickly announced, clearly relieved at the potential de-escalation. We will reconvene in 2 standard hours. As the chamber emptied, Helena received an urgent message from Arya. Ambassador, I've detected unusual energy signatures from 3 unregistered ships approaching the station. Their configurations match known outlier vessels. The outliers, radical separatists who believed humanity's expansion threatened galactic stability. Their involvement suggested this crisis went deeper than simple colonial disputes. Interesting timing, Helena murmured, accessing encrypted files with a thought. Arya, cross-reference any communications between those vessels and station personnel over the past 48 hours. And get me Commander Rashid, quietly. The station's secure conference room was designed to defeat any known surveillance technology. Even so, Helena swept it twice before activating her secure link to Earth Command. It's worse than we thought, Admiral Santos's hologram flickered to life. The outliers have been playing multiple sides. They've been feeding the Meridians false intelligence about human expansion plans while simultaneously encouraging hardliners in our own colonial administration. They're trying to start a war, Helena concluded. The question is, why now? New data from our deep space probes, Santos replied grimly. There's something coming from the galactic core, something big. The outliers think forcing an alliance through conflict is our only chance of survival. Helena absorbed this with the practiced calm of someone who'd spent decades dealing with worst-case scenarios. They're not entirely wrong about needing an alliance. They're just wrong about how to achieve it. You have a plan. The beginnings of one, Helena smiled slightly. But you're not going to like it. How do you feel about letting me die? Temporarily, of course. The next hour saw a flurry of encrypted communications and carefully orchestrated movements. Station security quietly adjusted patrol patterns. Maintenance crews modified certain environmental controls. And in her quarters, Helena prepared for what would either be her masterpiece of diplomatic manipulation or the spark that ignited an interstellar war. Arya, Initiate Protocol Lazarus, she instructed, checking the modified neural disruptor hidden in her collar pin. And send a message to first speaker Nix. Tell them I've discovered evidence of who's really behind the assassination attempt, and I'm willing to share it, privately. Message sent, Arya confirmed. Though I feel compelled to point out that your current plan violates 17 different diplomatic protocols and at least 3 laws of physics. Helena smiled as she adjusted her formal attire one last time. The best plans usually do. How long until our outlier friends make their move? Based on their current trajectories and energy signatures, approximately 43 minutes. Perfect, Helena said, stepping out into the corridor. Just enough time to set the stage. After all, the best way to prevent a war is to give everyone a common enemy. Even if you have to invent one yourself. The pieces were in place. Now it was time to play the game at a level her opponents didn't even know existed. Would you like me to continue with part 4, where Helena's plan unfolds and the stakes reach their peak? The private meeting chamber on Europa Station's diplomatic level had been designed to facilitate candid discussions between species who might literally be unable to breathe the same air. Its quantum-isolated environment made it perfect for confidential negotiations, or perfect for a trap. Helena stood by the observation window, watching Jupiter's storms rage in the distance as first speaker Nix entered. The Meridian leader's crystalline form rippled with patterns of cautious curiosity. You claim to have evidence about the assassination attempt, Nix's translator hummed. Though I admit, I'm curious why you chose such an isolated location for this meeting. Because, first speaker, Helena turned, her diplomatic smile firmly in place, I wanted to discuss the outliers without any of their surveillance devices listening in. The subtle shift in Nix's color patterns confirmed Helena's suspicions. The first speaker knew exactly who she was talking about. I assume you've detected their ships approaching the station, Helena continued. 3 vessels, running under masked energy signatures. What you might not know is why they're here. Before Nix could respond, the chamber's lights flickered. Right on schedule. Warning, Arya's voice echoed through the station's communication system. Multiple security breaches detected. Unknown forces have breached outer containment. All diplomatic personnel are advised to proceed to secure locations. Helena watched the carefully orchestrated chaos unfold through the chamber's windows. Security teams rushed through corridors, emergency barriers activated, and in the distance, the faint flashes of weapons fire could be seen. It seems our conversation will have to wait, Nix moved toward the door, only to find it locked. Ambassador? Actually, Helena smiled, this is exactly where we need to be. Arya, initiate final sequence. The chamber's lights cut out completely, replaced by the red glow of emergency systems. Through the windows, they could see multiple explosions blooming across the station's diplomatic sector. What have you done? Nix's patterns shifted to alarm and anger. I haven't done anything, Helena replied calmly. The outliers, on the other hand, are currently executing what they believe is a masterful plan to force our species into conflict. They're about to succeed, unless we work together. The chamber shook with another explosion, closer this time. Helena's neural implants registered multiple breach points, exactly as planned. Commander Rashid's security teams would be making a good show of resistance while carefully herding the attackers exactly where they needed them to be. Why should I believe you? Nix demanded, their form pulsing with increasingly aggressive patterns. Because in about 30 seconds, I'm going to save your life, Helena answered. And then you're going to help me save everyone else's. The chamber's door exploded inward, admitting 3 figures in advanced stealth suits. Their weapons were trained on both Helena and Nix, while their leader stepped forward. Ambassador Blackwood. First speaker. How convenient to find you both here, the leader's voice was artificially modulated. You'll be coming with us. The galaxy requires restructuring. Helena sighed dramatically. You know what the problem is with zealots? They always talk too much. What happened next would later be described in classified reports as a synchronized security response to unauthorized aggression. In reality, it was a masterpiece of choreographed violence. The neural disruptor in Helena's collar pin activated, temporarily shorting out the attacker's neural interfaces. The chamber's environmental controls suddenly reversed, creating a localized gravity well that played havoc with their balance. And Helena moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent decades making problems disappear. The first attacker went down to a precise strike at a joint their armor wasn't designed to protect. The second discovered why Earth's diplomatic corps received extensive close-quarters combat training. The third managed to get off a single shot before finding themselves unconscious and thoroughly restrained. Well, Helena said, straightening her slightly disheveled attire, that was invigorating. Now, first speaker, shall we discuss how to prevent an interstellar war? Nix's crystalline form had shifted to a pattern that the translator simply rendered as astonished recalculation. You orchestrated this entire scenario, the first speaker realized. The garden incident, the council meeting, all of it was to expose the outlier's manipulation. I prefer to think of it as creating an opportunity for cooperation, Helena replied, accessing the station's security systems through her neural link. Arya, show us the big picture. Holographic displays sprang to life, showing the carefully contained chaos spreading through the station. Security teams were systematically rounding up outlier agents, while diplomatic vessels from both human and Meridian fleets moved to protect the station from the approaching ships. We have a choice, Helena explained. We can let the outliers succeed in pushing us toward conflict, or we can show the galaxy something it desperately needs to see, humanity and the Meridian Collective working together against a common threat. And the evidence you mentioned? Nix asked, their patterns showing growing understanding. Oh, that's very real, Helena smiled. In fact, it's about to broadcast itself across every diplomatic channel in the sector. Arya? The chamber's displays filled with intercepted communications, financial transactions, and carefully documented proof of the outlier's manipulation of both sides. It was, Helena had to admit, some of her best work. Shall we go save galactic civilization, first speaker, she asked, gesturing to the door. I believe we have a rather dramatic statement to make about the benefits of cooperation. Nix's form shifted to a pattern that needed no translation, determination. Lead the way, Ambassador. I believe we have a new future to negotiate. The Grand Council chamber of Europa Station had never been so crowded. Representatives from 23 species filled the tiered seats, their translators creating a symphony of overlapping languages as they witnessed something unprecedented, a joint human Meridian security operation in progress. Helena stood at the central podium beside first speaker Nix, both of them watching tactical displays as their combined forces cornered the last of the outlier ships. The station's massive viewing screens showed the battle in real time, a choreographed demonstration of power and cooperation that would reshape galactic politics. The lead vessel is attempting to activate their quantum drive, Arya reported through Helena's neural link. Their containment fields are showing signs of stress. Predictable, Helena murmured. They'd rather destroy themselves than face capture. She turned to Nix. Shall we show them a better way? The first speaker's crystalline form pulsed with agreement. Together, they activated the communication channels they'd prepared. Outlier vessels, Helena's voice carried across space, broadcast on all frequencies. This is Ambassador Blackwood. Your attempts to manipulate our species into conflict have failed. But unlike you, we believe in second chances. Your concerns about the threat from the Galactic Core are valid, Nix added, their patterns shifting to project both authority and compassion. Your methods are not. Surrender now, and help us face this challenge together. The chamber held its breath as the standoff stretched. Helena could feel the weight of history in this moment, species that had been enemies for generations watching humanity and the Meridians work in perfect synchronization. The lead outlier ship's engines flared once, twice, and then powered down. We The outlier commander's voice crackled across the channels. We surrender to joint custody. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of relief and excitement. Species that hadn't spoken directly to each other in decades were suddenly engaged in animated discussion. The translators were working overtime to keep up with the flood of diplomatic overtures. A remarkable performance, Nix commented privately to Helena. Though I suspect this was more than just theater for you. Helena smiled slightly. The best diplomatic solutions solve multiple problems at once. We needed to expose the outliers, yes. But more importantly, we needed to show the galaxy what cooperation looks like in practice. Because of what's coming from the core, Nix's patterns shifted to show concern. The threat they warned about is real. Very real, Helena confirmed. But now, instead of facing it as divided species manipulated by fear, we'll face it as allies who've proven we can work together. She paused, considering. Assuming, of course, we can still discuss those colonial rights in the Proxima system. Nix's form flickered with what Helena's translator identified as diplomatic amusement. I believe we can arrange a more equitable distribution. Perhaps a joint development initiative? The next few hours were a blur of diplomatic activity. Treaties were drafted, alliances formed, and frameworks established for dealing with both immediate concerns and future challenges. Helena found herself at the center of it all, guiding discussions with the same precision she'd once used in less diplomatic endeavors. As the formal proceedings wound down, Helena took a moment alone at her favorite observation window. Jupiter's storm seemed calmer now, though perhaps that was just her perspective changing. Ambassador, Aria's voice carried a note of satisfaction. Earth Command sends their congratulations. Though they'd like to know if you could possibly manage future diplomatic breakthroughs with less property damage. Helena chuckled. Tell them I'm retired. This was me being restrained. She paused, watching a combined human meridian patrol pass by the window. Besides, sometimes you have to break a few things to build something better. The outlier prisoners are requesting to speak with you, Aria added. They seem particularly interested in discussing the galactic core situation. Schedule it for tomorrow, Helena decided. And arrange a joint briefing with First Speaker Nix. If we're going to face an extragalactic threat, we might as well do it properly. She touched the fountain pen in her pocket, a reminder of who she had been and who she had chosen to become. Diplomat, warrior, peacemaker, perhaps these weren't such different roles after all. Each required understanding your opponents, anticipating their moves, and knowing exactly how much pressure to apply. As she watched ships from a dozen species moving in newly coordinated patterns around the station, Helena reflected that perhaps this was what retirement should be, not an end to action, but a change in how that action was directed. Aria, she said finally, send a message to Earth Command. Tell them Operation Lighthouse is ready to begin. The galaxy just needed a little push to remember how to work together. The AI was quiet for a moment. And if they ask about your methods? Helena smiled, watching as a Meridian diplomatic vessel executed a perfect parallel docking maneuver alongside a human cruiser. Tell them that sometimes the best way to prevent a war is to give people a glimpse of something worth fighting for instead. Peace, she had learned, wasn't the absence of conflict, it was the wisdom to know which battles were worth fighting and which were better won with words. As she turned back to the council chamber, where representatives of former enemy species were now engaged in animated discussion about joint defense initiatives, Helena knew she had chosen the right path. The galaxy was changing. And for once, it was changing for the better.